I recognize what a huge privilege that is bestowed upon me. And so I also know from my own experiences of having family members who have been ill and have died that every day at my job is really the worst day of someone else's life. And based on how I show up for those encounters, it can have a lifelong impact on my patients and their loved ones, for good or for ill. And so I try to be mindful of that responsibility. And when I think about how that relationship plays out over time, it's really one of companionship, especially for my patients who have incurable illness, where I know that what they're dealing with is a challenge that in many ways lies beyond the frontiers of what medicine can cure or fix. And so what can we offer in the absence of a cure?
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
When your life shifts from curative hope to confronting the limits of medicine, who stands with you? Imagine facing a terminal illness, overwhelmed, vulnerable, and afraid. Now, imagine having a physician who does not just prescribe treatment, but walks beside you with clarity, calm, and care. Dr. Breeze Bell is that kind of doctor, a faculty member in both palliative and hospital medicine at UCSF. Dr. Bell is also the medical director for UCSF's End-of-Life Option Act program. Her journey from a professional dancer and yoga instructor to an integrative palliative care physician reveals a deep commitment to healing in all dimensions: physical, emotional, and spiritual. In our conversation, we explore how Dr. Bell guides patients through their most difficult chapters, why non-abandonment is a principle at the heart of her work, and how psychedelic medicine, integrative therapies, and policy can coexist to enhance dignity at life's end. She also shares moving personal reflection, from grieving her mother to receiving a posthumous letter from a patient who chose medical aid in dying. This is a conversation about death, yes, but also about choice, compassion, and presence. In our conversation, we discuss how Dr. Bell's unique career path shapes her approach to medicine, the evolution of UCSF End-of-Life Option Program, and what it truly means to be a companion to someone at the end of their life. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Breeze. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I was talking to Dr. Pantala, who we have for our podcast a few months ago, and your name came about. So here we are. But I always like to start about my guest journey. What took you where you are today? What excites you? Why you choose this path?
Well, I really stumbled backwards into medicine, Christine. That was never something I intended when I was a young adult, and I'm the first person in my family to go into medicine. So growing up, I really was a humanities kid. I was very passionate about reading and writing. I thought I might end up as a writer or an English instructor, but I simultaneously had a real passion for health and wellness. I danced professionally when I was in high school. And when I left my dance team and went to college, I ended up becoming a certified yoga instructor and taught yoga for several years, mostly on the side. And when I was in college, I had the privilege to learn about what was then called the Humanities and Medicine program at Mount Sinai. It's now called the FlexMed program. And so almost on a whim, I applied to medical school as a sophomore in college. Ended up getting accepted, and my whole life really transformed from that point forward around the possibility of actually having a career in medicine and healthcare. And throughout that time, because of some exposure I'd had in my own family and as a young adult, I was very interested in integrative medicine and personalized medicine and in sort of thinking about accompanying my patients on their entire health journeys. And so as I went through my medical training, medical school at Mount Sinai, internal medicine residency at Mass General, and my fellowships in palliative medicine and integrative medicine at UCSF, I really made my choices based on what skill sets I felt were most important for me to be the best doctor I could be in accompanying my patients and their loved ones at every stage of their journeys. And that's really still how I view my role, is as a companion through life for times that are extremely vulnerable for people. And so that has really informed my current work. I'm currently jointly appointed on faculty at UCSF in the divisions of palliative medicine and hospital medicine. In my palliative care work, I see patients in the symptom management service at the Cancer Center, where I care for patients and their loved ones who are experiencing quality of life impacts from their cancer. And then I also take care of patients as a hospitalist in the main UCSF adult hospital. And in both of those spaces, I like to think about how I can bring in integrative, evidence-based medicine as well and personalized care. And then in addition to that, I have a leadership role as the medical director for the End of Life Option Act at UCSF. And that role also came about organically. I'm happy to share more about it, but it grew out of some quality improvement work that I led along with an interdisciplinary team of about 20 colleagues back in 2022 to improve the process of End of Life Option Act or medical aid in dying care at UCSF. And we had a lot of success through that effort. And through that, the medical director position was created by UCSF Health Leadership. And I've held that position now for coming up on 2 years.
You mentioned earlier that you identify what are the areas that you can be really good at. What was your process to finding that? You were mentioning about being the companion part. How do you identify that? Because I never thought about when somebody wants to be a physician to be with a companion. Usually it's just like, I'm going to treat a patient. That's at least my imagination. One doctor wants to become a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I think that having knowledge and excellence and skills, in my opinion, is foundational to being an effective physician. And so I don't want to downplay those aspects of the job by any means. I mean, I spend a great deal of time and energy thinking about staying on top of my skills and making sure my knowledge base is, at the gold standard that I would want for my own family members who are seeking care. At the same time, I fundamentally view the role of a physician, really anyone in healthcare, as a role of service and as a calling. And to be ill or to be, certainly with many of my patients approaching the end of life, is just an incredibly vulnerable experience. And you put your trust in someone who is there as your healthcare provider, in my case, as your doctor, to receive the best possible care from that person. And I recognize what a huge privilege that is bestowed upon me. And so I also know from my own experiences of having family members who have been ill and have died that every day at my job is really the worst day of someone else's life. And that based on how I show up for those encounters, it can have a lifelong impact on my patients and their loved ones, for good or for ill. And so I try to be mindful of that responsibility. And when I think about how that relationship plays out over time, it's really one of companionship, especially for my patients who have incurable illness, where I know that what they're dealing with is a challenge that in many ways lies beyond the frontiers of what medicine can cure or fix. And so what can we offer in the absence of a cure? I think it's very important, and I consider it a big part of my teaching responsibility for the next generation to help the upcoming generation understand the principle of non-abandonment. And so I see that as a huge part of the care that we provide. And that's why I think of my role as, in part, being a companion to my patients.
When you said non-abandonment, what does that mean?
I think we've had a paradigm in biomedicine or Western medicine to focus on life-saving, life-prolonging, and curative interventions, all of which I'm, very much aligned with, right? I tell my patients in SMS clinic that there's no better news for their health than graduating from the need to see me in that clinic. And so and as in my work as a hospitalist, I'm mostly focused on curative interventions. At the same time, we're organic beings, living in a body. And last time I checked, none of us made it out of here alive. And so at a certain point on everyone's journey, people become sick or they become older and ultimately they die. And that's true of every living thing on the planet. And even though we like to, convince ourselves that we're somehow separate from nature. And I think sometimes that can be incredibly painful for us as physicians when our patients reach a point in their illness where we don't have tools to fix the problem. And as you pointed out earlier in the conversation, Christine, I think we also live in somewhat of a death-denying society. We're talking about death as a fundamental part of our living experience can be very uncomfortable for people. And so sometimes I think patients can have the experience that when there's no more treatment available for the illness at hand, that they're being abandoned or that there's nothing else to offer. And in the palliative care aspect of my work, I feel like very strongly that we always have care to provide and we always have something to offer. And at a minimum, I can't change the hard for my patients, but I can change the alone. And I can help them understand that, my team and I will be there to support them and to help to ease their suffering however we can. So that's what I mean.
Thank you for explaining that. It gives me a different way of looking at it too, because I think the importance. I think as a human being, the feel of not being supported can be really painful. And I think when you go through things that is uncomfortable or challenges in life or being sick, knowing somebody's supporting you, I think is such a game changer, I think, about how you see what you're
That has been my
facing,
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier also about the work on your quality work that results in this End of Life Option Act here at UCSF. Tell us more of that.
So the End of Life Option Act was passed in California in October of 2015, and the initial workflow at UCSF went live in June of 2016. And the first 5 to 6 years of that experience, as in every institution, was really, I would consider it to be a pilot, an initial intervention, in some ways an experiment of how do you translate state policy into a workflow at a given institution and healthcare provided on the ground. So I think anytime there's a new process like that, there's always an opportunity, typically many opportunities, to reflect on how things have been going, to look at the data, and to then compare that to the gold standard practices that we see, at our sister institutions statewide, as well as in other states where these policies have been enacted, and identify the gaps between, what's actually happening and what is the gold standard best practice care that we want to be delivering in this arena. And I think in our case at UCSF, there were several of those that had been identified. And being in the palliative care division, patients do approach us about this aspect of care. And patients who qualify have a legal right to pursue that care. And I felt strongly that I wanted the care that they were receiving to be aligned with best practices in the field. And in general, I really enjoy, health systems leadership and looking at healthcare delivery systems and thinking about opportunities for quality improvement. in the way that we're doing things. And so it ultimately ended up being a natural fit when the law was updated in uh, at the beginning of 2022 to raise my hand essentially to lead this interdisciplinary group of colleagues to undertake a comprehensive review of our workflow and policy around End of Life Option Act, or EOLOA, at UCSF, and to uh, make some changes that would align us, to the changes that had been made in the law, but also allow sort of a global opportunity for improvement in how we delivered that care.
Oh, I was about to ask you, can you tell us first, what is End of Life Option Act?
The End of Life Option Act is a law that was passed in the state of California at the end of 2015 that allows an adult person who meets certain criteria, who has a life-limiting illness with a limited prognosis, to request medications to assist with ending their life from their doctor. And there are several requirements in order to be able to actually obtain those medications. But just briefly going over them, the patient has to meet with the prescribing physician, who is an attending physician like me, twice, at least 48 hours apart, to request the medications and determine that they are in fact eligible and free from coercion and that they don't have any contraindications. They also need to meet with a consulting physician who's another attending physician like me, who essentially confirms that indeed this is the patient's wish and yes, they are eligible. And they have to fill out a patient attestation form, essentially identifying that this is their wish. And then once that happens and those steps are completed, the patient has the option to obtain the medications prescribed by the physician who's leading the process. And then at an appointed time, they can ingest the medications, and that typically leads to death within a matter of hours.
And how does the patient made aware of this option right now?
It's a great question. We are legally allowed to bring it to our patient's attention and to bring it up in routine clinical care. More often than not, patients hear about it from the lay press. I mean, especially since it's been around for almost 10 years now in California and in Oregon before that and in several other states. This is a fairly well-known option that many patients have across America, depending on where you live. And most patients will learn about it, hear about it, and then read about it. And we actually have an updated website as part of our revamped resources that we created through our quality improvement process that my team and I, take pains to keep updated. And if you search UCSF End of Life Option Act, it's one of the first links that comes up. And so we have a lot of educational material on the website as well. And then, of course, the physicians who are leading the process provide additional education and support.
And doing this work, you interact with a lot of patients who are choosing to take this option. What impact that you feel that the work that you do in terms of their well-being?
I think for many of my patients who have a serious, incurable illness, who are approaching the end of their lives, that can be an experience that feels very disempowering and can make them feel very out of control in their lives. And that can come with a whole host of emotional experiences, fear and anger and despair in some cases. And for some of my patients, it can be a huge relief to know that they can have some agency over their dying experience. And that can provide a sense of autonomy, peace, and clarity, I think, at a time when many of those things feel harder to access.
I recently watched the movie Still Alice.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I have.
It's for some of us listeners who have not seen that movie, definitely should check it out. It's based about a woman who had an early onset Alzheimer. And she was recording the video to tell herself when she's ready to end her life, to give her the instruction what need to do. So she could record that conversation that she has on a separate folder. And basically, she also give herself a test every day or every week to when she cannot answer certain questions, she should go and open that folder to help her instruct her to end of her life. And watching that movie make me realize that, at least in the movie, it's like we want to maximize our life, and that at the end, you end up losing control of the terms that you want. Because when Alice waited until the end that she really wants to be ready to give up her life, she has no more that agency. At least that's my lesson learned. And I keep telling myself is that it's really interesting how we as human beings, we want to get every ounce of everything if we can to get till the last minute, and at the end it doesn't serve us. At least that's my lesson to me.
I think that can sometimes be the case, and I think it's hard to distill a single lesson about life because, of course, many people have different life paths, and I think for each of us we have these sort of recurring themes in our lives that we keep coming back to, and hopefully if you're paying attention you can have some personal growth and increase wisdom along the way. That's at least one of my goals for myself. It is tricky when you think about medical aid in dying or End of Life Option Act in the context of neurologic illness. And that gets us into a real legal and ethical gray area, an area where there's sort of ongoing advocacy, because one of the groups that tends to request this option most frequently is patients with ALS. And that is a population we care for in this way quite often. But it can be tricky to find the prognostic window where that patient population is eligible before they've lost the physical capacity to self-administer the medications. Similarly, in patients who have cognitive impairment, neurodegenerative illnesses like dementia, unfortunately, one of the contraindications to using medical aid in dying is sort of lacking the cognitive capacity to make that decision to ingest the medications on day of. And you cannot use a loved one or a family member to assist you with that. And so that can be very painful for some of our patients who, have neurodegenerative illness, and yet when they prognostically qualify for medical aid in dying, have lost the mental capacity to move forward. There are other countries where it's carried out differently, but here in California, that is against the law.
Mm-hmm. It's, I had to say that we came a long way, though. I feel like this conversation more like decades ago was not even people wanted to talk about. I think there's a lot of
I think that's right.
Bad press as well.
And I think, I don't know, it's hard to project into the future at all at this moment, but as the population ages, I think there is more attention on, living well later in life, and also the experience of both caregiving for older adults who are at the end of life and who are dying, and also, of course, having the lived experience of being someone who is dying and at the end of life. And, I personally celebrate that. because I don't know what your experience was like when your husband died, but when my mom died, also somewhat suddenly, now a little over 7 years ago, I was a palliative care fellow at the time. I was struck by many things. And one of them was the experience I had that it seemed like this was the first time someone had ever died in the history of the universe. I mean, trying to even figure out the logistics of what you're supposed to do after a loved one passes away and you have responsibility for carrying out the needs of the estate was incredibly confusing. And I think it highlighted for me how culturally every aspect of death is sort of shrouded in mystery. And we have really removed death from the daily lived experience of being alive by sort of shutting it behind closed doors in the hospital. I think we've done ourselves a disservice in doing that because we're not really giving our children and future generations the benefit of believing that they can handle this part of life that is as natural as being born.
Yeah. I think having that, being more informed about it, you look at it differently. And I mean, death is, you miss a loved one because that means you cannot see that person ever again. But at the same time, if, knowing what I know now, I wish I knew it earlier, then I would see it differently. But then again, it's hard to know when you don't need to know it at that moment. But I think I always tell people, like, I learned a lot from the movie. It turned out that everything in the movie was not correct. And I think and I totally understand that the movie has to end in 2 hours. But I think that is also the society, what society think, what grief should look like, what death should look like when somebody died, what that means. And I think I wish it was more open conversation, or somebody who write about it, who is somebody who have lived experience, or at least understand it. I think that would be helpful. But yeah, no, I think if we can talk about death more as part of living, I think it can better prepare us a little bit, I think.
I think that's right.
And knowing that we'll be okay when you lost a loved one, and it takes time to be okay.
Yeah. And my experience of grieving the loss of someone you love dearly is that it never really goes away. You just kind of grow around it and incorporate that into the fabric of who you are. And that has definitely been true in my case.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's almost that is a big life experience that shape about who you are. And I feel that who we are is shaped with a lot of our life experience, and losing someone is definitely a big piece that can change about how you see things and how you want to live your life going forward too. So
I think that's right.
it could be a beautiful thing. I keep saying that, somebody who has experienced that is a gift, that you have to go through the grief in order to experience the gift. But no, most people don't want to go through it, but then you don't get the gift.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel fortunate in the palliative care work that I do. It's a daily reminder that we never know what the future holds. And I think it helps me see my daily lived experience with a different lens on. And I mean, it sounds a bit cliche, but, I try to remind myself in all the little moments with my kids, or, just being out for a walk with my dog, that this is truly the good life, and it's happening right now. And make sure I don't, put that off in my mind. And it's a life's work, it really is a daily practice. So I think being able to care for people who may not have much time left is a huge privilege for me in terms of how I look at my own life. And circling back to the Medical Aid in Dying, the End of Life Option Act, I really see this as part of the continuity of that principle of non-abandonment that I was talking about. I don't particularly look forward to providing this intervention for patients. I would much rather provide them a curative intervention. I think most of us who go into medicine do so with that intent to help our patients be healthy for as long as possible. And, what can we offer at the limits of curative interventions? And it's really not my role to make a judgment, about whether or not this is the right choice for my patients. If they feel strongly that they want to pursue this and they legally qualify, I see it as part of the care I can provide to them by allowing them to follow through on their wish.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it, I feel like it's an empowering the patient to have this option. And not everybody has to choose this route, but if they want to, knowing that, I think is give you a peace of mind too, I think.
Yeah, that has been my experience.
Yeah. So my last question, we talk a little bit about life lessons here. What are some of the, when you see, like you're saying, like a lot of the work that you do is like you see them at the most challenging time of your patient's life. But I'm sure that there's a lot of something that is uplifting as well for providing this kind of care. Can you share some of story that, that you hold on to, that it gives you a little bit of comfort knowing how much this work is really meaningful to the patient that you really want to help?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's many stories I could share. A few months ago, I took care of a patient who was from Louisiana and had moved out to the Bay Area to be with her daughter, who is a physician, and she had advanced colon cancer and had also had a background in healthcare herself and had a lot of trauma after having an experience of a family member having a dying experience that was exceptionally painful. So she had a lot of fear around what the end of life was going to be like for her. And through the course of our work, she ultimately decided that she wanted to pursue aid in dying. And we were able to move forward with that. And it was a very uncomplicated experience for her. She had a wonderful local getaway the weekend before she moved forward with the ingestion, had a wonderful time with a close girlfriend, and then died peacefully after ingesting the medications. And both she and her daughter provided a lot of feedback to me about how meaningful it was for them and how much it put her at peace knowing that she had that option. But then I received a letter from the patient that was sent posthumously, and it was just incredibly moving to me, knowing how much I really impacted her life, even though we'd only known each other for a short time. And I still keep that letter on my mantle to this day because it's a reminder that you never know the gift that you give, how it's going to be received. And that's not my job to evaluate that. All I can do is put my best foot forward and do my best to serve my patients and try to spread good in the world. And so that's just sort of a daily reminder that I try to keep in mind.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, your insight, and for all the work that you've done.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We hope you found the conversation insightful, and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you the latest in health innovation. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn and Twitter for updates on upcoming episodes and more. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare. I'm Christine Winoto, and thank you for listening.